Hello, everyone, and welcome. Sorry for the technical difficulties, but we are live and we're here with another Superstonk Live AMA. Today we have part two with investigative journalist Lucy Komisar. I'm your host, Pink Cats on Acid. Lucy, you can call me Pink, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. And boy, we had a lot of technical difficulties.
We
We'll
did, but
fix.
we're rocking and rolling now.
Yeah.
So today we're talking about the SEC, and you touched on some of the history of it. You touched on it in your last AMA, but I want you to go ahead and just get right into it for the sake of time, and give us a little bit of history of the SEC.
So this is a story of the corrupt SEC. After the stock market crash in 1929, there was a meme that was heard. He who uh, sells what isn't his'n must buy it back or go to prison. And this was a very important matter for the time because many people believe that this was the first example of naked short selling. It was called watering the stock because what people did was they made stock certificates because instead of digital at that time, the shares were in stock certificates, and they made counterfeit stock certificates and sold them, and it was called watering the stock. Remember that? Watering the stock. And therefore, that is believed to have promoted it promoted the market collapse, the stock market collapse of 1929. And that started, many people believe that started the Depression. And so what did the US government do? Well, Ferdinand Pecora was an immigrant working class kid from Sicily who put himself through New York Law School. He was hired in 1932 by the Senate Banking Committee to investigate the causes of the crash, to do a whitewash, of course, based on what those congressmen wanted, but he didn't get the memo. His hearings exposed such practices as pools to support bank stock prices, such as let's all coordinate trades to pump up the stock. Does that sound familiar? Like in GameStop? National City Bank, now Citibank, had hidden bad loans by packaging them into securities and selling them off to unwary investors. Does that sound familiar? Remember mortgage-backed securities that tanked and that the sellers knew were going to tank? That was what he was looking into. The findings of the Pecora Commission exposing the corruption of the financial system industry led to public support for regulation. It took really dirty stuff to move the public, which would be the regulations that came out, the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933. That separated investment banking from retail banking, banning bankers from using depositors' money for their own high-risk investments. The Securities Act of 1933 and the Securities Exchange Act of 1934, which set up the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. So Pecora wrote a wonderful memoir, Wall Street Under Oath. He said, bitterly hostile was Wall Street to the enactment of the regulatory legislation. What? The thieves don't want rule of law. About disclosure rules, he said that had there been full disclosure of what was being done in furtherance of these schemes, they could not long have survived the fierce light of publicity and criticism. Legal chicanery and pitch darkness were the bankers' stoutest allies. Think about who are the bankers' stoutest allies today. Franklin Roosevelt appointed Joseph Kennedy, father of Jack and Robert, to be SEC chair. He had built the family fortune on stock manipulation, financial manipulation, but Roosevelt thought he knew where the bodies were buried. He knew who the miscreants were. And so for about 5 years, the SEC cleaned up the Wall Street Augean stables. for about 5 years. Then Kennedy's buddies of the financial oligarchy took charge again in early regulatory capture. Let's move fast forward about 50 years, half a century, to 1985. With the support of friends in Congress, Wall Street had neutered the Securities Acts by assuring that the SEC would not enforce them. But the corruption was sometimes a little inconvenient, too much in your face. So in 1985, the National Association of Securities Dealers, now FINRA, which represents the brokers, hired Irving Pollock, a former SEC commissioner who was honest, to look at short selling. Among his report's proposals, reporting of short interest, that is, the amount of sales shorted but not yet covered. He said they should be public and perhaps reported more frequently. A borrow for delivery in broker-dealer transactions should be required. A mandatory buy-in should be adopted for delivery after a reasonable period when there has been a fail. That means the broker for the buyer who hasn't gotten the shares would buy them on the market and charge the broker for the seller, the buy-in. There should be, he said, surveillance of large short interest positions, shorts which are shorts not yet covered. Did the SEC adopt these proposals with great enthusiasm? Obviously not. Short interest is not reported frequently. The broker-dealers locate instead of borrow, and we know they don't really locate, or they use counterfeit shares. Now, buy-ins were allowed but not required. And Leslie Bonney, an academic, in 2004, did a paper for the SEC on buy-ins, and she said they were rare. But requiring buy-ins would make the stock go up. The short sellers would lose money. That was not on the SEC agenda. And there was no surveillance of large short interest positions. In fact, corruption would be increased thanks to the friends of Wall Street, President Bill Clinton, and his collaborator, Treasury Secretary Robert Rubin, who had come from Goldman and would be rewarded by a multi-million-dollar position as an advisor to Citibank. They, in 1999, killed the Glass-Steagall Act, which had separated investment banking from retail banking. Retail banks, till then, could not use depositors' funds for risky investments. People had lost everything when the banks collapsed in 1929, and only 10% of their income could come from selling securities. That was done away with. So the crooked banks and broker-dealers had nobody stopping them. That set the stage for the last very corrupt decades. The SEC was battered with complaints again. So in July 2004, it promulgated Reg Show. Show is for short selling. The hedge funds and big brokers who had been or would be shown to be illegally shorting all lobbied against it. And the end result was a very tepid reform of short selling that was a Swiss cheese of loopholes. Think of Al Capone writing the tax laws. On the other hand, his crooked progeny do write the tax laws. Reg Show would be implemented in 2005. The SEC knocked out a proposal of penalties for failing to deliver that told the brokers everything they needed to know. And it wrote two giant exceptions into Reg Show: ex-clearing and market makers. The rule didn't apply to ex-clearing. That means clearing shares, trades outside the DTCC, the Depository Trust Clearing Corporation, which is a national stock clearing company. Yes, it's a private company and it's owned by the big broker-dealers. It applied only to trades going through a registered clearing agency, i.e., what got sent through the DTCC. And because the SEC said ex-clearing was rare, why worry about that? Sales that avoided clearing agencies could fail, not be delivered without the buyers, brokers reporting the fails to the DTCC or buying in, requiring the short sellers, brokers to buy the shares on the market. So this was a get out of jail free card. And it was to protect short sellers and help them avoid a reg show. The dealers just went ex-clearing. They either cleared internally, if you're a huge Goldman or Morgan Stanley, you've got enough customers inside the bank to clear trades, or with a cooperating broker-dealer, or they went through dark pools. Dark pools were the private exchanges set up by the big prime brokers and banks. Al Capone could never have done something so sophisticated. The major perpetrators, the perps, are the large banks doing it for large clients, hedge funds, or for their own accounts. If they can do the transaction privately, ex-clearing, reg show doesn't apply. Guess what percentage of trades now go through dark pools? 40%. It doesn't sound rare to me. If a trade fails ex-clearing, it doesn't fail at the DTCC. Easy to do naked shorting. It never fails. Reg show also didn't apply to derivatives, the financial casino bets acknowledged as a prime cause of the 2008 crisis, and which also did not trade through a clearinghouse. Even stocks that cleared through the DTCC were not always covered. The brokers got a grandfather clause that allowed existing fails to continue. And brokers didn't have to close out the shares they had sold short before the stock went on the threshold list. That is a list of shares that for 5 consecutive settlement days had fails to deliver of 10,000 shares or more at a clearing agency, and where the level of fails was equal to at least 0.5% of the issuer's outstanding shares. But the brokers were subject to mandatory covering only on the 5th day. Then the broker-dealer had 13 days to deliver the shares to the buyer or the lender. And if it failed to do so, it could not trade that stock until it did. But the SEC knew, because staff wrote a paper on it, how options conversions allowed the broker-dealers to put off fail dates forever. It was all a charade. They made up shares. They used them for borrowing, for covering. They were fake. It was all a charade. The other exception was for market makers who make a market in particular stocks so people can always buy and sell them. Reg show allowed an options market maker exception. It was called after the person who designed and pushed for it, the Madoff exception. Did I say the crooks wrote the rules? In prison in 2012, Madoff told Forbes journalist Diana Enriquez, "I fell into my crime of staying naked short. The fact that the prosecutor and trustee seem clueless of this is why my frustration is so great." Clueless or complicit, you just don't go there. As if that wasn't enough, the SEC in 2007 eliminated the uptick rule. That required short sales to be conducted at a higher price than the previous trade. Not helpful if the purpose is to batter down the stock price. It was never really enforced anyway, but just gives you a clue of how they thought they could get away with anything. They're going backwards. Then we have stock lending, which is taking care of the banks. According to the SEC Office of Economic Analysis, in 2008, Reg show, which had been in effect for 3 years, had not reduced outstanding fails. Many stocks remained on the Reg show threshold list for hundreds of trading days. How could that be? Remember the rules about 5 and 13? That wasn't a bug. It was a feature. For years, the SEC claimed naked short selling and fails to deliver were not a problem. Once things began to go sour in 2008, remember the crashes, and big banks were targeted, Bear Stearns, Lehman, the first thing the SEC did was ban naked short selling in 17 financial stocks, plus the mortgage lending agencies, Fannie and Freddie. It was ironic since the big banks, brokers, had been carrying out the scam on others, but they were hoist on their own petard, you might say. And they chose the solution that people battling naked short selling had advocated for years. A July 2008 order said no traders could make trades involving those institutions, the 17, unless they had pre-borrowed the security or otherwise had it available in their inventory. They had to deliver the security on the settlement date. Borrow shares before you sell them. Before you sell them short, stop the counterfeiting. All the regs that came out were because naked shorting, the counterfeiting of shares, was undermining the banks. And the SEC went from nothing is happening till the fall of 2008 that the market is coming apart because of naked shorting. There were some slight improvements made in 2008 on paper for everybody, but on paper. The market makers exemption was eliminated because the SEC said substantial levels of fails had continued in threshold securities, and a significant number were the result of market maker exceptions. But they still had 6 days to settle. And so you have market makers failing and rolling over their shares every 5.5 days, just rolling it over to some other broker-dealer or bank. Easy to do. Everybody's in on this deal. The grandfather provision on threshold securities was eliminated. Unless its position in threshold securities was closed, a broker-dealer couldn't effect further shorts in them without borrowing or arranging to borrow the securities. Don't worry, they finessed that, moving the trades between broker-dealers using fake options conversions that they had perfected. They had many ways to get around these rules. Now, the amendments addressed fake borrows. It said where a broker-dealer entered into an arrangement with another party to purchase or borrow securities, and the broker-dealer knew or had reason to know that the other party would not deliver in the settlement of the trade, the purchase or borrow would not be bona fide. But, and it repeated that the NSCC, the National Securities Clearing Corporation, which is a DTCC subsidiary, clears and settles the majority of equity securities trades conducted on the exchanges and in the over-the-counter market. Well, they don't mention the rules still don't apply to X-clearing and the dark pools. The X-clearing route to naked short selling was protected. Fails could be concealed at the start by not reporting them to the NSCC, the clearinghouse. In fact, the dealers could use X-clearing to opt out of fails from trades through the exchanges. They could take them on to their own books and deal with the fails as they chose. And that meant they would do nothing. They would just let the fail sit there, and the SEC would do nothing about it. It allowed this. Protecting the interests of the big banks, brokerages, the SEC did not include a hard borrow, a hard locate requirement in its amendments to the reg show. And there's an interesting backstory here because they were making amendments. The rule went into effect in 2005. They made amendments in 2008. The backstory involved former Delaware Senator Ted Kaufman, who recently ran Joe Biden's post-election transition team. It shows how the big stock market players and the institutions they control have blocked attempts to deal with naked short selling. Kaufman was Biden's longtime chief of staff, and he was named to the Senate seat vacated by his boss when Biden became Barack Obama's vice president. After the '08 market meltdown that included abusive naked short selling of Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers, Kaufman, a Democrat, and Georgia Senator Johnny Isaacson, a Republican, introduced legislation that directed the SEC to write regulations to end naked short selling. They determined that the SEC's regulations were unenforceable. Hedge funds could spread rumors, do massive shorts without locating, deliver after the prices dropped, which they had encouraged to drop. In July of '09, Kaufman and 6 colleagues from both parties wrote the SEC proposing a hard locate that would ban all short sales unless the executing broker first obtained a unique identification number for the shares that were being borrowed, perhaps through an automated centralized system. This would prevent multiple short sales on the basis of a single share. Yeah, we located that share, and so did the other one, and so did the other guy, and so did our partner over at Goldman, the same share. According to Jeff Connaughton, who was then Kaufman's chief of staff, months before the letter, the DTCC, the clearing agency, had gone to the SEC with a proposed solution to naked short selling that looked like Kaufman's, looked like that solution, with the DTCC creating a centralized database that would prevent the same shares from being used for multiple trades, multiple short sales. They were concerned because their stock borrow program was not getting much in the way of paying clients. But the DTCC told Connaughton later, we got pulled back. They meant, Connaughton said, by their board, by the Wall Street powers that be. That's Connaughton's words. Because in the case of the DTCC, as well as the SEC, Wall Street controls the regulators. Kaufman continued to try to fight naked short selling in the Dodd-Frank debate. The SEC was ordered by the Dodd-Frank law of 2010 to require more transparency in short selling and stock lending. 11 years later, it still ignores that order. And nobody from Congress has reminded them about that. Even the recent hearings have not reminded them about that. But the SEC occasionally takes enforcement actions that go after low-hanging fruit. That is, they don't bother anyone significant. They don't order more than minor penalties, cost of doing business. Here's a couple of cases. In 2003, the Sedona Badian story. Sedona case where the Badian brothers from Vienna ran a death spiral financing scheme that involved providing a loan that would be repaid in shares. But then they did a massive shorting attack that knocked down the price of the shares. So went from $6 to 20 cents. The SEC filed a complaint against Thomas Badian and his company Rhino for fraud and market manipulation of Sedona shares. Badian and Rhino immediately settled with the SEC for a $1 million fine without admitting or denying guilt. The $1 million was a pittance, the cost of doing business. The company was destroyed. And the irony, in 2006, the SEC filed a civil suit against Andreas Badian, 4 officials of Pond Equities, and a trader at Refco, all involved directly in the naked shorting, but not against Ladenburg Thalmann, the very high-profile broker-dealer owned by billionaire investor Carl Icahn and a partner that facilitated the whole deal and many other death spiral financing deals. Another story, in 2005, EagleTech. EagleTech had an invention, which was new at the time, to push phone calls to other devices, letting people use a single phone number that would ring, follow them from phone to phone. He became Eagle Tech and the inventor, became a target of a group of death spiral financing criminals working with Solomon Smith Barney in New York. 5 Solomon officers and a group of investors offering to buy convertible preferred shares from Eagle Tech for up to $6 million. The loan convertible into shares, as in the Sedona death spiral financing. Then they did a pump and dump. So the stock went up to $14 and then dropped to 75 cents, reducing the market value by about 113 million. The stock finally went to 2 cents. The FBI was investigating some organized crime stock fraudsters. It busted 17 mob members, led by the crooks that ran the scheme against Eagle Tech. The SEC filed suit against John Cerubo, Tonino Labella, and their colleagues, collaborators, their henchmen, who ran the scam that got control of Eagle Tech stock. It said they generated in excess of $12.7 million from the sale of the stock. And members of the Solomon Smith Barney financing team and their options market makers in Chicago were selling shares and then failing to deliver. But Cerubo, Labella, and the others, mobsters, would be banned from penny stock trading in order to pay back the ill-gotten gains and fines. I couldn't find any notice of any penalties against the Solomon Smith Barney team or their Chicago options market maker collaborators. But it's always good to go after the mob. Then, this part of the story is the hardest to believe. The SEC filed suit against Eagle Tech, the victim, to deregister its shares because it couldn't afford several $100,000 to file audited financial reports. The delisting is like a bankruptcy. All the investors are wiped out. The naked shorters never have to cover. The SEC finished what the mob started. It killed the company. Then go to 2007, Goldman. From at least March of 2000 to May 2002, that's more than 2 years, Goldman Clearing used the firm's direct market access automated trading system that allowed them to trade directly in the market to unlawfully sell securities short in advance of follow-on and secondary offerings of new shares they would be able to get cheaper. But what they did was illegal. They did not borrow or locate. They prepared their own sell orders on the direct access terminals that Goldman gave them and falsely marked short sales as long. The orders were routed directly to the New York Stock Exchange and other markets for execution. Goldman Clearing's own records had information that customers were selling securities short, and they were misrepresenting their short sales as long. Goldman Clearing's record showed that the customers were repeatedly failing to deliver the securities that they were purported to sell long. So for more than 2 years of allowing shorts to be marked as longs, Goldman had to pay civil money penalty of, wait for it, $1 million. The SEC, okay, let's go to another one. The Options Express. Options Express was a subsidiary of Charles Schwab, repeatedly engaged in sham transactions known as resets, designed to give the appearance of having bought shares to close out an open fail, while in fact not doing so. Options Express had its customers buy shares and simultaneously sell call options that were the equivalent of selling shares short. The purchase of shares created the illusion that the firm had covered the short. However, the shares were never actually delivered to the buyers because On the same day, the calls were exercised, effectively reselling the shares. So this gets complicated, but it's sort of a wash trade. You do one thing and then you do the opposite and you end up with zero. The purpose was to perpetuate an open short position, but it was a fake. So how did that work? In 2009, 6 Options Express customers bought $5.7 billion worth of securities and sold short about $4 billion of options. They did this to a couple of dozen companies. In January 2010, the customers who did the scam accounted for 48% of the daily volume of trading in Sears stock. In the end, Options Express had to pay $4 million in penalties. Didn't I just say something about billions? It was the cost of doing business. That's all the SEC asked them to do. Now, there are some good people in the SEC, even if the people at the top are very questionable. And here are some interesting insider stories. The story of Gary Aguirre says it all. As a student at Georgetown Law School, Aguirre got a prize from the SEC for a paper on Wall Street corruption, as detailed in the Pecora hearings that led to passage of the Securities Act of 1933. He would walk in Ferdinand Pecora's footsteps. In September 2004, Aguirre started as a senior counsel at the SEC Division of Enforcement. The SEC in July had just promulgated Reg Show, which it said would stop abusive naked short selling. So Aguirre recalled, the first thing I noticed is there seemed to be a deference to the large law firms who represented Wall Street players. And there were a lot of people there not at the same skill set level as the attorneys representing some of the players from Wall Street. Aguirre certainly wasn't in that group. He's a very, very smart person. Aguirre was assigned to an investigation that implicated a powerful Wall Street insider, John Mack. He had been the head of the hedge fund Pequot Capital Management. The suspicion was that Mack had tipped the current CEO, Arthur Samberg, of General Electric's pending acquisition of Heller Financial. Mack was the only suspect. And without an investigation, the SEC would never be able to consider filing insider trading charges against Mack or Samberg or Pequot or anyone else arising out of Pequot's trading in GE and Heller. So this was the investigation that Aguirre was assigned to. The SEC did not want that investigation. An SEC official told Aguirre it would be very difficult to take Mack's testimony because of his political influence. He told him that Mack was, quote, an industry captain, that he had powerful contacts, that Mary Jo White could contact a number of powerful individuals, any of whom could call Linda about the examination. Mary Jo White was a lawyer at a Wall Street firm. Linda was Linda Thompson, the head of enforcement. Aguirre confirmed the conversation with this official in 2 emails the next morning. And the first email referenced Ferdinand Pecora. The senior officials in the SEC's Division of Enforcement, run by Linda Thompson, blocked an SEC subpoena seeking Mack's testimony and records for the investigation. Then Aguirre had contacted the Office of Special Counsel to discuss the filing of a complaint about the SEC's protection of Mack. 3 days later, September 1st, 2005, while on vacation, Aguirre was fired by phone. He gave key papers to Charles Grassley on the Senate Finance Committee and to the Senate Judiciary Committee. There were hearings in 2006. He said the SEC, quote, favor to John Mack cleared the way for his return on June 30th, 2005, as Morgan Stanley CEO, with no danger of an SEC lawsuit for insider trading. Mary Jo White would become chair of the SEC in 2013 to 2017, appointed by Wall Street's favorite guy, Barack Obama, who apparently didn't know the Aguirre story. Later, David Kotz, the SEC Inspector General, said he had found evidence that, quote, raised serious questions about the impartiality and fairness, end quote, of the SEC's investigation of possible insider trading at the Pequot Capital Management hedge fund. He said also, he condemned what he considered the common, quote, common practice of giving outside lawyers access to high-level SEC officials when they had complaints about their clients' complaints about frontline investigations. Kotz made numerous recommendations for reform, which the SEC, of course, ignored. Aguirre sued the SEC and won $750,000 in back pay and damages. Mack, after being CEO of Morgan Stanley, became CEO of Credit Suisse, then chair of Morgan Stanley, and now is senior advisor to the global investment firm Kohlberg Kravis Roberts, whose strategic partners are hedge funds. Here's another story. This was 2005. It's a man named Fickus who worked for the SEC and Overstock, and Chris Cox, who was the chair of the SEC. This is Fickus, an SEC staffer who tried to do the right thing, but was pulled back. In August of 2005, Overstock filed a suit against hedge fund partners, hedge fund rocker partners, and the equities research firm Gradient Analytics, saying they illegally colluded in short-selling the company while paying for negative reports to drive down share prices. The CEO of Overstock, Patrick Byrne, took his information to Mark Fickus of the SEC San Francisco office. Byrne said, look at the patterns. Their stocks are naked shorted by Dan Loeb, David Einhorn, Stephen Cohn, David Rocker. Those were the big shorters. Look at the dates. Journalists Bethany, Boyd, Raymond, Greenberg wrote trash jobs. That was Bethany McLean, writing for Forbes, Carol Raymond for Dow Jones, Roddy Boyd for the New York Post, Herb Greenberg for MarketWatch. Burns said, it was the same pattern. Each one of those journalists writes a hatchet job. There is naked shorting. The SEC begins action against these firms, and the Milberg-Weiss lawsuit comes. In every case, it's part of the same bum rush on the stock. The Milberg lawsuits involve their paying shills to buy stock, then suing the company when the price went down. Several Milberg lawyers went to prison for that. So the SEC would go after the lawyers, but you'll see they don't go after the companies or the brokers. Byrne argued that Gradient, an investment advisor, which he said was putting out fraudulent reports the shorters used, should be investigated, and that the journalists were central to the case. The subpoenas were issued to Carol Raymond of Dow Jones and Herb Greenberg of MarketWatch to provide information about conversations they had with stock traders and with analysts. Now, Fickus issued the subpoenas with the approval of the SEC's head of enforcement, Linda Thompson. It was announced that the SEC was investigating Gradient and had issued subpoenas to Carol Raymond and Herb Greenberg, and also to Jim Cramer of The Street. Patrick Burns said David Rocker sold his shares in The Street. He said a month later, Cramer sold some of his shares in The Street. And he asked a question, which I found interesting. Why would a hedge fund have an interest in owning a financial publication? Kramer discloses in his books stuff that is wildly illegal, Patrick Byrne said. Now, protection for journalists is about protecting sources, about stories they are writing, not about their own possible market manipulation. The question is whether freedom of the press extends to reporters whose articles are part of illegal naked short selling scams. Fiques wanted to know, but he was summoned to Washington to meet with the new SEC chair, Chris Cox. Ultimately, Burns said the SEC caved under the media pressure. Cox killed the subpoenas, and the SEC dropped its investigation of Gradient. Cox, by the way, was also the SEC chair when Gary Aguirre was fired. After this long history of regulatory capture by Wall Street, what should the SEC do now to reclaim its reputation, if it can? Solutions are there if it wants to protect investors and stop taking orders from the big broker-dealers and the hedge funds. But it's mostly the big broker-dealers. They run the show. One, require buy-ins. Require the broker of the investor who doesn't get shorted stock delivered to buy it on the market and charge the seller's broker. Of course, require buy-ins. But that would make the stock go up. The shorters would lose money. Not really on the agenda. Restore the uptick rule so shorters cannot sell for less than the last shorted trade. That would stop shorters from hammering a stock down to bankruptcy. Create a consolidated audit trail, CAT, to collect order and trade execution information to identify and enable punishment of illegal trading activities, including naked short selling. More than a decade after the SEC promised to create a CAT following the 2010 flash crash, CAT does not exist. Impose real penalties on serial transgressors, like loss of license, ban from trading. At the top, not the lower level guys. Send cases of egregious trading cheats to the Justice Department for criminal action, prosecution. And of course, end the revolving door with Wall Street. What will Gary Gensler do? And will he listen most to the big brokers or to investors, including the people on Superstonk? That's the question for all of us to answer, but it is so important for the people out there to understand this long history of SEC corruption.
Absolutely. And that was a great story. Thank you for that, for sharing that with us, Lucy. And that's a great segue into the questions from the community. We've been trying to get the attention of the SEC, and we've been getting louder and louder. So I think that you can provide a lot of guidance for us on what we can do in an official capacity to start ringing our bells and get that attention, to get this. You mentioned this started in 1932. And here we are in 2021. So for almost 100 years, this has been a cancer within our financial system that has been completely not only ignored, but protected by a lot of really big entities. And I think we're all starting to open our eyes to that. So thank you for some of that history. And that takes us into some of our community questions. So I wanted to start with, in your last AMA, you mentioned that naked short selling scams started a long time ago, like we were just saying, but it ends with GameStop in your book. So can you expand and clarify a little bit further what you meant by that?
Well, I meant that my book would end with GameStop because it is it's an iconic event. But of course, it's all still going on now. Naked short selling and the corruption has not stopped. But the book I am writing will start back when I started with the crash, and we'll take it up to GameStop. Whether it ever this ends is really up to the public. The public got really angry at the crash, the depression, and that's what started the legislation. The public has to get very angry for members of Congress to do anything now.
And I think that's happening. The more that we learn and the more we have our experts come on and speak and teach us, I think that we're all collectively getting more angry at how the system's been allowed to continue for so long. And so even if it doesn't end with GameStop, naked short selling doesn't end with GameStop in your book, it's a great climax, I think. And it is a good story. So I'll go to the next question. This user was asking if it was possible for the hedgies and the government to pull any kind of trickery to make this squeeze not happen.
Well,
are there any rules that they're unwilling or unable to break?
Yeah, they're willing to break all the rules. Look at the history. They will figure out a way to finesse any kind of legislation. But so it takes some very smart people and committed people to make that not happen. Because we've seen what's gone on for nearly 100 years. They will find any way they can. Look, these are really criminals. They're doing things that are illegal. If you do something illegal, it makes you a criminal. But they've gotten away with it because they pay off people, they buy Congress, and that's been the problem for all of these years.
And especially, it sounds like since the 90s. It really kicked into high gear in the 90s in your story. So for most of a lot of apes' lives, we have a lot of millennials that that's all we know is this corruption. So we have this user who essentially was asking in a really busy world where a lot of us don't have time to find a good trustworthy source of information. How do you recommend, where do you recommend people find a digestible news source for those that don't have time to watch full hearings or read full bills?
Well, there are some places I go to that aggregate. There's one called Naked Capitalism that focuses a lot on economics. And so I look at that, and they link to other things. But you have to just spend a lot of time looking for the online places. For the most part, I would forget about the mainstream media and certainly the mainstream broadcasters, because they will never tell you anything. And they're owned by some of the people that are the miscreants. So, but you just have to go and find places that are going to tell you, and that's one of them that I have used. But there are others too.
Excellent. And like you mentioned earlier, we have legislation that's essentially protecting the media whenever they tell these little stories, like we've seen with Market Watch during the GME saga. We've seen some funny things happen with timing when things were posted and things like that. So, but it sounds like that they're protected by the legislation in place. So, looks like we may have lost Lucy. Are we still you still there, Lucy? Looks like we may have some more technical difficulties. Bear with us. All right, guys, looks like Lucy has got some more technical difficulties, but if you are still with us, Um, she went over a lot in Reg Show. In 2004, sounds like Reg Show is something that never really took off. And if one of the questions that we were going to be asking had to do with the hearings that Congress is interviewing megabank executives this week. Okay, so there's two different hearings. I believe one is on May 26th and one on May 27th. So they'll be bringing these megabank executives before them. And the question for Lucy was whether or not this was just political theater or whether she believed that these questions, if they would be asking the correct questions. And since we did kind of discuss this privately, I will go ahead and share with you what her opinion on this was. She believes that all of this, the GME hearings earlier back in March, the one in February where Keith Gill testified, they are all just political theater and they're not really getting to the bottom of it. Lucy had shared her opinion before that naked short selling was like hardly even mentioned during the congressional hearings. And so it's hard to put something in the title and then not discuss it. So she's of a very strong opinion that all of this is just political theater, and that so far we've not been able to push to real change and real legislative change. Hopefully we can change that. I know that she also previously expressed some gratitude and she was very impressed with what we've been able to do at Superstonk and the verified information that we get, that we compile and that we provide to the community free of charge. There's no paywall. There's no membership. You don't even have to join Superstonk to be able to access this information. She commended us for that and said that in the absence of mainstream journalism, that we were doing an excellent job at getting this message out. And so at the time that she said that, we were at about 275,000 members. I think last I checked, we were at maybe 315,000, I believe. So word is getting out. And I even saw where GameStop liked a tweet about this AMA today. So hello, GameStop. Hello, Chairman Cohen. So let's go on to this next question that I didn't really get to talk to Lucy in a lot of detail about this, but I think it sounds like she's kind of given us some grounds to start digging on what we can do and how we can go deeper into seeing this actually go from us just talking about it and storytelling where, for the last 100 years, they've been trying to push through this legislation. How do we actually get this to happen? How do we make effective change happen? We're all very angry. We're in disbelief as we read more and more DD, like the House of Cards that out of it is going to be coming out with part 2 and 3. You guys are going to be really angry whenever you read that. You'll realize that it's all just a big criminal automated system that is quite well protected. But as we read all of these DDs, we're getting more and more upset, and we're all of a vigilant mindset that we want to do something. We want to be proactive about this. We want to make sure that this doesn't continue for our children's and grandchildren's generations. What can we do to change that? So first of all, what you're doing right now by watching this video, subscribing to Superstonk, like the video so that it gets more exposure, sharing things on Reddit, uploading good content, real content, doing your own due diligence just on posts that you read. Shills and FUD are becoming a lot more refined, and they're learning and they're adapting. And I've seen some really excellent DD come out of some shills that looked very convincing, that gets reported because of apes like you and your vigilance to get to the bottom of information. And if something is unverified, you guys have been really great about making sure that mods know that. So to me, procuring and curating an environment on Superstonk that has an air of verification and is a trusted source, that's huge because we can provide that to the community. So being able to present Superstonk as a whole to a new investor or even to legislators, to someone who's interested in learning more on how to legislatively get this thing going, maybe they're not even invested in GME, by upvoting good content, creating good content, and just being subjective in the content that you do promote, you're creating an environment that is changing the world. And I like to repeat Stonk U2's analogy where he says that this is like he likens the sub to the city of Athens because it's a great think tank, and it needs to be protected at all costs. And so by doing that, you guys are being awesome. So Lucy is still having technical difficulties, and we have gone through the questions. And so we're going to give her a few more minutes to try to get set up. She did have a lot of trouble getting her regular computer set up. So thank you guys for being so patient and so forgiving of our wonderful guest. Back on what else we can do. I don't know if everyone is aware, but when I've submitted some things to the SEC whistleblower website, you are able to do that as well. As an investor, you are able to submit a complaint to the SEC, not necessarily as a whistleblower. You don't have to have insider information in order to submit a complaint. So any citizen can submit a complaint to the SEC, and being a shareholder, and I would particularly be reaching out to the SEC. I personally have been and will continue to, concerning overvoting. So because of the overvoting issue, okay, guys, so it looks like Lucy may not be able to rejoin us. I think we're going to go ahead and close out the live stream for now. We appreciate you coming, and I want you guys to stay strong, continue to hodl, and remember to vote your shares. There's information on Superstonk website about how to vote your shares, and Carl Hagberg had a lot to say about how Euro apes and anyone else who's struggling to vote your shares, how you can handle that. The biggest thing is to make noise. The message of the day today is to continue to make noise. So we'll make noise at the SEC. We will make noise at our brokers that won't allow us to vote. We will continue to make noise and get people in on the cause and understanding that this has become larger than just GameStop itself as a retailer, although we do believe in the business model that Ryan Cohen brings, and we like the stock. Naked short selling is something that has been around for longer than most of our lifetimes, longer than our grandparents were alive. So we're very vigilant, and we are committed to bringing this to an end. So we appreciate Lucy Komisar's time today. We appreciate you guys being so patient with all of the technical difficulties, but we still got it out there, and that's what's important. So thank you guys, Superstonk. You're always awesome. And as always, you guys be excellent to each other. Take care.